Hey there, ready for a deep dive into something pretty fascinating? We're tackling brand valuation today.
Awesome.
And we're not just talking about, how recognizable a logo is.
Right?
We're going deep on how to actually figure out a brand's worth,
You've got it.
like its real value,
Yeah.
both in, cold hard cash,
Mm-hmm.
but also its impact out there in the market.
For sure. And we've got a couple of ISO standards to help guide us.
Oh, okay.
ISO 10668 and ISO 20671.
Catchy.
Yeah, I know, right?
So what are those all about?
You can kind of think of them as two different lenses,
Okay.
each one giving us a different perspective
Okay.
on what actually makes a brand valuable.
Gotcha. So different ways of looking at the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break them down.
Sounds good.
First up, ISO 10668.
All right.
This one sounds like it's all about the numbers, right?
It is, yeah.
Like, if a brand were actually up for sale, on the auction block,
Mm-hmm.
how much would someone actually pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. That's what ISO 10668 is all about, figuring out that price tag.
Okay.
It's actually super important for things like mergers and acquisitions.
Right, like big business decisions.
Huge. It's essential for investors and businesses making, major decisions about a brand.
Totally. But I imagine this isn't as simple as just like slapping a number on it, right?
Oh, you're right.
What are some of the challenges with like actually putting ISO 10668 into practice?
Well, you've got to remember, we're talking about things like brand loyalty.
Yeah.
It's not exactly like counting inventory.
Right. It's much more, I don't know.
It's tricky.
It's less tangible, yeah.
Exactly.
So where do you even start with something like that?
Well, ISO 10668, it lays out a framework, right?
Okay.
With a bunch of different valuation methods.
Okay.
You've got your income approach, market approach, cost approach. It's actually pretty comprehensive.
Sounds like it.
But the problem is, the real world,
Yeah,
it's messy.
for sure.
Think about a company like Tesla.
Okay, yeah,
They've built this incredible brand
absolutely.
all around innovation and like their image.
Right.
But that could be really tough to quantify using, these traditional methods.
So even with like a set of guidelines, there's still a lot of interpretation involved.
Absolutely, 100%. Gathering the right data, that's really crucial.
Yeah,
And it can be a major, major headache.
because how do you even define the right data?
Exactly. Like what even counts as a data point?
Yeah.
For something like brand perception, how do you measure like a viral marketing campaign?
Right. Especially if it lives completely online.
You got it. These are questions that that companies are really struggling with right now.
Totally. Because you need solid data to back up any kind of valuation.
For sure.
And sometimes that data, it's hard to find.
It can be.
It can be very slippery, especially like you said with newer companies that are built around these things that are, less tangible.
Exactly.
Okay, so that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it sounds like even just to implement this standard, you need a lot of experience and expertise in the field.
Oh, yeah.
Like this isn't just a plug and play.
Not at all. It's knowing how to interpret the data, which factors to weigh more heavily.
Yeah.
That's where human judgment really comes in.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
All right.
And talk about ISO 20671.
Okay.
So if 10668, the first one, is like a financial snapshot, this one, it seems like it's more about the long game.
Yeah.
How healthy and strong the brand is, for the future.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
Really?
Yeah. ISO 20671, it takes a much more holistic approach instead of just the price tag. It's also thinking about consumer perception,
Right.
brand loyalty,
Uh-huh.
market positioning,
Yeah.
all these different factors that contribute to long-term success,
Okay.
even if they're not, immediately reflected in the balance sheet.
That's really interesting. But couldn't some people argue that those factors are subjective and therefore harder to really measure accurately?
Yeah.
I mean, what I might see as a strong brand,
Uh-huh.
someone else might see as, I don't know, outdated or something.
You've hit on a key point there.
Have I?
Yeah. Because some critics do say that, this standard is less scientific,
Okay.
less precise.
Right.
But think about it this way.
Okay.
Even a brand that has like sky-high financial value,
Yeah.
they're still vulnerable if their reputation takes a hit.
Right.
Or if they fail to, adapt to how consumer behavior is changing.
Right.
Think about what happened to brands like Blockbuster.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were giants,
Huge.
but they completely failed to adapt
To the digital age.
to the digital age. Exactly.
That's a really good example. So ignoring those, kind of softer qualitative aspects of a brand could actually be a huge risk,
He could.
especially in a market that's changing so rapidly.
Yeah. And that's exactly what ISO 20661 is trying to address. It's pushing companies to think long-term,
Okay.
to manage their brand's health proactively, not just chase, like, those short-term financial gains.
So there really are two very different approaches then.
They are.
But both important.
Yes.
So before we go into like, which is better or the strengths and weaknesses,
Sure.
help me understand how they work together.
Okay. Well, imagine for a second.
Yeah.
You're an investor.
I'm an investor.
You're thinking about acquiring a company.
Okay.
You see that they've got great brand recognition,
Uh-huh.
but their sales figures, they're dropping.
Uh-oh.
So how do you make a decision?
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. And that's exactly where these two standards come in.
Oh, okay.
So ISO 10668, that's going to help you determine the financial value
Right.
of the brand. Like, what are you actually buying?
Yeah.
But ISO 20671,
Uh-huh.
that could reveal whether that value
Okay.
is actually sustainable.
Gotcha.
So are there underlying issues
Mm-hmm.
with the brand perception
Yeah.
or their market positioning that might be contributing to, those declining sales?
Interesting.
It's almost like
Like doing a home inspection
exactly.
before you buy a house.
Yeah, you want to know what's behind the facade.
100%. So they really are like two sides of the same coin.
They are.
You need both to get the complete picture.
Exactly. And using them together, that can help companies make smarter, more strategic decisions
Right.
about their brand's future.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so far so good. But I am curious about, we've talked about the benefits. I'm curious about the criticisms.
Yeah.
Are there any downsides or like potential weaknesses that we should be aware of?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely limitations and challenges.
Okay.
I think that's where we should dive in next.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right.
All right. So we've talked about how important these ISO standards are, for understanding what a brand is really worth.
Right.
But let's be honest, no standard is perfect.
True.
What are some of the criticisms or like potential downsides we should be aware of?
Well, one of the big ones, especially with ISO 10668, is just how hard it is to actually implement it in the real world.
Yeah.
Remember those Finnish companies we talked about?
Yeah, they were struggling with the data.
Exactly. It's not always easy to get the data you need, especially for things like brand perception or the impact of online campaigns.
Right. And even if you have the data, it seems like a lot of it comes down to interpretation.
You got two experts could look at the same data and come up with totally different valuations.
Really?
Yeah, depending on their experience and, how they weigh certain factors.
So it's almost like evaluating art.
Kind of, yeah.
There's always going to be an element of subjectivity.
Exactly. You can't completely eliminate that human element.
So even though the standard is trying to, make the process more objective,
Right.
it's not a foolproof system.
Yeah, some critics would even say that ISO 106668 can actually create a false sense of precision.
How so?
Well, it makes it seem like brand valuation is this purely mathematical equation.
Right, just plug in the numbers.
Exactly. But it's actually way more nuanced than that.
That makes sense. So it's really important to understand the limitations of the standard.
Definitely don't just take the results as gospel truth.
Okay, what about ISO 2671?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that one might be even more subjective.
It can be.
Since it's dealing with all those qualitative factors.
Yeah, measuring things like consumer perception and brand loyalty is inherently tricky.
Because there's no single right answer.
Exactly, and that's where some of the controversy around ISO 2671 comes from.
So because it relies on data that's hard to quantify.
Right.
And can be interpreted in different ways?
Exactly. Some people argue that this makes ISO 2671 less reliable.
Than the other one.
Yeah, than ISO 10668, which at least deals with, concrete financial figures.
But wouldn't it be a huge mistake to just ignore those qualitative factors altogether?
Oh, absolutely.
We've already talked about how a brand can have a really high financial value on paper,
Right.
but still be vulnerable if its reputation is shaky or it's out of touch with its target market.
100%. And that's exactly the counterargument to the criticism.
Okay.
Proponents of ISO 2671 would say it's absolutely crucial to consider those softer aspects of a brand because they ultimately contribute to its long-term value.
Okay, so rather than seeing these standards as like two completely separate competing approaches,
right.
Maybe it's more about using them together.
I think so.
To get a more comprehensive view of the brand.
Exactly. Recognizing that a brand is complex.
Yeah.
It has both quantitative and qualitative dimensions.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, this has been super eye-opening. I feel like I have a much better understanding of what goes into assessing a brand's worth, both in terms of, dollars and cents, and its overall strength and health.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so what's the key takeaway here? What should our listeners be thinking about?
I think the most important thing is to approach these standards with a critical eye.
Okay.
Understand that they are tools.
Right.
And like any tool, they can be used effectively or ineffectively.
So don't treat them as like
Magic formulas
Yeah.
that will automatically solve all your branding problems.
Right. It's about understanding their strengths and weaknesses.
Yes.
Using them strategically and not being afraid to question the results.
Exactly.
But it sounds like both standards can still offer valuable insights.
Absolutely.
For anyone who's involved with brands.
For sure.
Whether they're building them, managing them, or investing in them.
Definitely. And it's worth remembering that these standards are both relatively new.
Oh, that's true.
They're going to keep evolving as we gain more experience using them.
Yeah.
And understanding how brands operate, in a world that's constantly changing.
Speaking of a world that's constantly changing, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how things like social media and the rise of online influencers have impacted brand valuation.
That's a great question, and it's definitely something that brand experts are thinking about a lot these days.
Because it seems like the whole digital landscape.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, it have to be.
It's added a whole other layer of complexity to brand valuation.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Talking about these ISO brand standards.
Right.
The good, the bad, the complicated. But before we wrap up, I wanted to pick your brain about something.
Sure.
It's been on my mind.
Okay.
We've talked about how these standards can help us understand a brand's worth.
Right.
But the thing is, the world of brands, it's constantly changing.
It is.
So how do things like social media and influencers, how do they change the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that all the brand experts are really grappling with right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that digital landscape. It's really thrown a wrench into a lot of the traditional valuation methods.
I bet.
I mean, think about it.
Okay.
Influencer marketing, viral trends, these online communities.
Yeah, they're huge.
They can have a massive impact on a brand's perception and ultimately their value.
Right.
But they're so hard to actually measure.
Right. Like, how do you even begin to measure the value of, say, a TikTok trend that just sends sales through the roof?
It's tough.
Or what about, like, celebrity endorsement on Instagram?
Yeah, you've got to point those traditional metrics.
Like advertising spend?
Right, media impressions, all that.
Yeah.
They just don't fully capture the impact.
Of these digital...
What did you call it?
Phenomena, yeah.
Yeah, we need new tools, new frameworks.
Access all this.
Yeah, to figure out the value of a brand's digital footprint.
Okay.
How engaged their online community is.
Yeah.
And, their ability to actually leverage these social media trends.
It's almost like we need a whole new set of standards.
Yeah.
Just for the digital age.
It kind of feels that way sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And while those ISO standards we talked about...
The 10668 and 2671.
Exactly. They don't really address these digital nuances specifically.
Okay.
They do give us a foundation to start thinking about them.
Okay. So...
Well, think about ISO 2671.
Okay, the one that's focused on the long term.
Right, all about brand strength and consumer perception.
Yeah.
And that's even more relevant now.
Because of social media.
In the age of social media, exactly.
Yeah.
Because, like we were saying, a single viral post can completely make or break a brand's reputation.
That's true.
Overnight.
Wow. So even though these standards were developed before social media really took off.
Yeah, before TikTok and Instagram and all that.
Their core principles still apply.
I think so, yeah.
They're still relevant.
They highlight how important it is to understand what really drives brand value, whether those factors are, tangible assets or these intangible digital influences.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've gone deep on brand valuation today.
We have.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Good, I'm glad.
Really broadened my understanding of how to assess a brand's worth.
That's what we're here for.
Both in terms of that financial value, but also its overall strength.
Absolutely.
Really great insights.
Thanks.
Before we go, is there one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I'd say remember this, a brand, it's more than just a logo or a product. It's a living, breathing entity that exists in the minds of consumers.
Wow, I like that.
And a brand's value is constantly being shaped by so many different things, those traditional financial metrics to, the constantly evolving world of digital and social media.
So we've always got to be adapting how we think about brand valuation.
Exactly, and understanding these complexities.
Yeah.
That's essential for anyone who wants to build a successful brand, manage a brand, or invest in one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive.
It has.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your expertise.
My pleasure.
And for everyone listening, we hope